Human, are you single? Please marry my mom. She's really nice, begged the alien girl. The nutritional dispensary queue stuttered forward like an ancient robot attempting to dance. Arden stood among the bodies, his interest level hovering somewhere between watching paint dry and counting ceiling tiles. Hunger was a simple problem. This was merely obligation, another box to check on his daily survival list. His attention wandered beyond the hunched figures ahead, past the lighting panels that flickered with the enthusiasm of a dying firefly, through ventilation ducts that wheezed like asthmatic aliens, and into the comfortable embrace of nothing. Overhead, coolant dripped from a fractured conduit, creating a percussion solo against metal that no one had bothered to appreciate. Further down, a maintenance automaton, with apparent delusions of being a circus performer, scuttled across the ceiling, trailing sparks that everyone collectively agreed wasn't their problem. The deck plates beneath his boots vibrated with the subtle hum of Helixar Hub's gravitational stabilizers. The station's way of saying, I'm working, but I'm not happy about it. The recycled atmosphere carried notes of scorched protein paste, today's special, mystery substance number 7, metallic dust, and the communal exhalations that reminded everyone personal space was a luxury, not a right. A beggar huddled behind a support column, coughing weakly into her sleeve, having apparently decided to become an architectural feature. No one acknowledged her existence, as if making eye contact might somehow be contagious. Arden kept his hands buried in his pockets, shoulders tense enough to crack walnuts. The proximity of strangers repulsed him. An accidental brush of fabric against his arm triggered a flinch and backward step that had become his signature dance move. This aversion was a well-worn companion, like a bruise he deliberately poked each morning to ensure it never healed. His eyes remained fixed on a fascinating patch of absolutely nothing. Then came the tug at his jacket, gentle but unmistakable, like being politely mugged. He blinked, glancing downward with the reluctance of someone expecting to find their pocket picked. Instead, a child stood beside him, emphatically not human, small, reaching perhaps his waist if she stretched, with skin the color of twilight azure that made her look like she'd been dipped in the most beautiful part of dusk. Her wide amber eyes blinked with the deliberate slowness of someone who knows they've got your full attention and plans to keep it. Her silver-white hair resembled a creative explosion, disheveled but intentionally secured with improvised fasteners of twisted wire forming loops that defied both gravity and fashion sense. She regarded him with an intensity that suggested he'd already signed a contract he hadn't read. Human, she stated with the clarity of someone announcing the obvious, are you unattached? The question had all the spontaneity of a tax audit. Arden blinked, his brain temporarily going offline for maintenance. She continued, clearly not interested in waiting for his neural functions to resume. My mother possesses remarkable kindness. She creates melodies even when sustenance is scarce. She hums ancient songs when sleep evades me. She never strikes in anger. Her tears only come when she believes I'm already asleep. Her voice maintained the factual tone of someone reading a particularly compelling product specification. You must become her mate. His respiratory system forgot its primary function. Something within his chest constricted, as if his lungs had suddenly developed stage fright. The child tilted her head slightly, studying his reaction with the clinical interest of a scientist observing a particularly fascinating specimen. You didn't refuse, she observed, as if documenting an important experimental result. Arden stared at her, mouth attempting to form words his brain hadn't supplied yet. Around them, Helixar Hub pulsed with its characteristic chaos. Negotiations that sounded like arguments with occasional pauses for commerce. The ripping sound of adhesive patches being slapped onto infrastructure that deserved retirement. The sizzle of reprocessed proteins pretending to be food. Yet in this peculiar moment of connection, it all faded to background static. She's positioned there, the child said, pointing with the authority of an air traffic controller. Arden followed her gesture toward the base of a central support pillar. Partially concealed behind the stacked empty storage crates and a vending unit that had clearly given up on life, sat a woman on what generous observers might call a cargo blanket, and realists would term marginally better than sitting directly on metal. Her legs were folded beneath her, a threadbare shawl wrapped around her shoulders like the last embrace of dignity. Her posture had perfected the art of withdrawal. Shoulders hunched, hands clasping a cracked synthetic food container with the kind of hope usually reserved for lottery tickets. Her skin matched the child's azure shade, but deeper, more intense, like the moment night claims the sky but leaves a memory of color. Her silver-white hair cascaded over her shoulders in a way that suggested it had once been her glory, but now served as partial shield. She didn't raise her eyes, but Arden sensed her awareness of his observation in the sudden rigidity of her frame, a prey animal sensing potential danger. She remained motionless, like a statue contemplating whether animation was worth the effort. Arden swallowed hard enough that the sound might have been audible in neighboring sectors. The evidence was unmistakable. This wasn't mere poverty. This was devastation with a master's degree in suffering. The quiet kind that doesn't announce itself with pleas or outcries but collapses inward like a dying star, sealing all exits. Her silence carried weight beyond simple hunger. It spoke of shame as fluent as any language. Shame he recognized from emergency shelters or where hope went to die, from refugee processing centers where bureaucracy trampled dignity, from that one boy who'd stopped speaking after his third placement as if words had become too expensive to waste. She had once been someone of significance. He could sense it like an echo. He tore his attention away before it became permanent. The child continued watching him with the patience of a predator, albeit a tiny one. "You didn't say no," she repeated softly, as if explaining a particularly promising loophole. "That implies possibility." He began, but his vocabulary had apparently taken an unscheduled vacation. "It's acceptable," the child assured him with the generosity of a benevolent ruler. "You may consider it." Then she turned and walked back toward her mother with the unhurried confidence of someone who knows they've already won. Arden observed her settle beside the woman, tuck herself against her mother's side, and glance back once before placing a protective hand on the older woman's knee, a small gesture that somehow managed to say, "I've got this covered," without a word. Arden stepped out of the queue without consulting his brain, which was still processing the encounter. He circled the sector once, then again, pretending to have a purpose when in fact he was merely orbiting an unexpected gravity well. Later, when he passed their corner again, purely coincidentally, he assured himself, he slowed his pace. His fingers tightened around the warm container in his hand, suddenly aware of its potential beyond personal sustenance. After a moment's hesitation that felt like negotiating with himself, he crouched down and placed a second container, still warm, still full, at the edge of their cargo blanket. He avoided eye contact with the dedication of someone who feared it might create obligation, didn't wait for acknowledgement that might require response. As he walked away with studied casualness, he felt it, her gaze brushing against his back like the ghost of a feather. Not suspicion, not desperation, just awareness. Tired, reluctant awareness that registered his existence without judgment. The following morning, he found the container gone, abducted by cleanliness rather than abandoned to the local ecosystem. In its place, folded with the precision of someone who treats even garbage with respect, was a strip of packaging material creased so meticulously it could qualify as origami. Words had been inscribed in elegant, flowing script that made standard alphanumerics look like art. Consider teaching her additional vocabulary. Her grammatical structure is commendable. The note was written in standard, but running along the margin, tapering like wind-sculpted sand formations, were Cyrillian glyphs, precise, ancient symbols of a language typically encountered only in museums or the collections of the insufferably educated. Cyrillian script wasn't merely written, it was sung onto surfaces in flowing strokes, each character a note in visual form. Once, Arden recalled from some forgotten educational module, the Cyrillians had used their script to compose intricate love verses and funeral dirges that made even their enemies weep. Now it was nearly extinct beyond archival databases and the occasional cultural exhibition where visitors pretended to understand its significance. His fingers tightened slightly around the note, treating it with unexpected reverence. She had written it, not in gratitude, not as supplication, simply because something within her remained alive, a pilot light of personality that refused to be extinguished. That evening, when he passed their location again, purely by chance as his new route through the station coincidentally intersected their position. He brought 2 containers. He placed the beverages down with the care usually reserved for explosives, met the child's eyes, and offered the smallest, most involuntary smile his facial muscles had produced in recent memory. The child didn't fully reciprocate, but her lips quirked upward with the suggestion of amusement. When he stood and turned to leave, her voice followed him, soft but knowing, like a fortune teller who doesn't need cards. "She finds you appealing," the child said with the casual air of someone discussing weather patterns. Arden offered no response, his vocabulary having once again abandoned him at a critical moment. But for the first time in weeks, he didn't proceed directly to his quarters with the efficiency of a programmed drone. He circled the sector again, his pace deliberately slowed, as if waiting for something he couldn't name but would recognize when it appeared. Arden's sleep that night resembled a negotiation more than rest. The cargo blanket, the child's voice, the woman who refused eye contact. They wove through his consciousness like persistent salespeople long after the station's illumination dimmed for the artificial night cycle. Normally, he worked until exhaustion made sleep non-negotiable, organized his small living space with military precision, sat alone with a beverage that tasted of obligation, and retired to bed feeling as hollow as his surroundings. Routine made the silence bearable, gave it structure and purpose. But now something had invaded that carefully cultivated emptiness. Uninvited but not unwelcome, soft as breath, small as a tug on a jacket, but persistent as gravity. He told himself it was inconsequential, a momentary kindness, a singular occurrence that required no follow-up. But morning found him heading toward the commerce sector earlier than usual, his feet apparently making decisions his brain hadn't authorized. No queue this time, just a beverage vendor operating at reduced capacity, steam rising from a heating unit that looked like it had been constructed from spare parts and optimism. He purchased 2 cups again, one for himself, one for them, a pattern forming before he recognized its shape. When he reached the crates near the support column, the blanket space was empty, abandoned like his plans for dignified detachment. For a moment, the area appeared deserted, just crates, shadows, and an old ventilation duct pushing tired air into the corner as if trying to inflate emptiness. Then he noticed it. His empty container had been returned, rinsed with what must have been precious water, dried, and placed carefully on the crate edge, balanced with the precision of someone who treats even trash with respect. Beside it, folded into a perfect quadrilateral that would make geometry instructors weep with joy, was a scrap of fabric bearing another note. Cerulean children develop communication early. We prioritize emotional comprehension before logical structures, but she's been forced to master both simultaneously. The handwriting was unmistakable, elegant, intentional, with those same curving cerulean glyphs framing the standard text like music notation surrounding prose. This wasn't merely communication, it was ritual, a vestige of grace in an environment that had long abandoned concern for beauty, like finding ballet in a cargo bay. Arden traced the edge of the fabric with his thumb, eyes lingering on the script. There was grief concealed within its symmetry, a sorrow that had learned to speak beautifully rather than loudly. He didn't fold it, simply slipped it into his jacket pocket like contraband joy, and continued walking with newfound purpose. The commerce sector had awakened in the interim. Voices rose in volume with the enthusiasm of professional arguers. Transactions shouted in 5 different languages, simultaneously creating a symphony of capitalism. Food stalls activating heating elements that promised more warmth than flavor. The air carried the robust aroma of cultivated fungi and synthetic protein that marketing materials optimistically described as almost indistinguishable from the real thing, without specifying to whom. Someone had spilled lubricant across the floor, grating, causing a cleaning drone to perform an unintentional comedy routine as it attempted to mop while doing an impression of ice skating. Arden navigated through the commotion with the muscle memory of long practice, and when he spotted them back at their usual location, something like relief washed over him. The completion of a circuit he hadn't realized remained open. The child noticed him first, raising one hand in a gesture that wasn't exactly a wave, but more an acknowledgement of his continued existence. He crouched again, set the beverages down with the ceremony of a peace offering. This time he had brought sustenance as well. Simple grain porridge in a self-heating packet that glowed with modest warmth. Nothing that would impress a culinary critic, but warm, nourishing, and familiar as a comfortable silence. He rose to depart, mission accomplished. She won't consume anything while under observation, the child stated with the clinical detachment of a researcher noting behavior. It's like watching a shy animal at a watering hole. He paused, curiosity overcoming his commitment to non-involvement. Why not? She considers accepting assistance degrading, like admitting the universe has won. It's not charity, he said, the words feeling defensive even to his own ears. It's sustenance. The child shrugged with the world-weary acceptance of someone who has already had this argument. They're equivalent to her. Accepting help means admitting need, and need means vulnerability. Arden hesitated, internal debate visible in his expression, then seated himself, not directly beside them, just against the crate, arms resting on his knees, facing away, allowing the moment to unfold without the pressure of observation. Behind him, silence initially, then the soft symphony of packaging being opened, utensil against container, the quiet rustling of movement. She was eating. He didn't smile, but something in his chest loosened. Not pride, just a shift in balance. A moment tilting toward trust, like a plant finding light. She expresses gratitude, the child said, breaking the comfortable silence. He glanced over, confusion evident. She didn't verbalize anything. She communicates with her hands, the child responded, as if explaining something obvious. They're having an entire conversation you're not hearing. This revelation landed like a discovery. You can interpret her hand movements. She nodded with the confidence of an expert, and her respiration patterns, and the tension in her neck, and the specific way she blinks when she's thinking something she won't say. It's like reading a book written in muscle tension. He studied the child more intently, reassessing her complexity. That's considerable knowledge to acquire. She used to create songs, the child said, her voice softening with memory. Before we were prohibited, before music became dangerous. She taught me how to perceive without conventional listening. To hear the songs, people don't know they're singing. That statement affected him more profoundly than anticipated, like finding an unexpected door in a familiar wall. Prohibited, he echoed, the concept alien to him despite his familiarity with station regulations. Station Regulation 47B, subsection 9, no unauthorized vocal expressions in commercial corridors, the child recited, mimicking quotation marks with her fingers with such perfect sarcasm it must have been practiced. Someone claimed her singing induced excessive melancholy, so authorities silenced her. Apparently, emotions require permits here. The woman remained silent, head bowed as if the conversation floated above her, but Arden felt the intensity of her silence like radiation, invisible, constant, irreversible, and somehow more eloquent than words. He regarded the child again, seeing her more clearly. What's your designation? The formality of his question surprised even him. Mila. Simple, direct, no elaboration needed. He nodded, accepting this gift of information. I'm Arden. I know, she grinned with unexpected mischief. I heard the maintenance supervisor shout it when you dropped a hydrospanner on his foot. His creative combination of your name and anatomically impossible suggestions was quite educational. He laughed softly, surprised by the sound. Wonderful. I'm infamous for clumsiness. She leaned forward conspiratorially. I appreciate your movement patterns. Excuse me? Confusion replaced amusement. You don't walk like others. You don't angle away when observing her. You're not afraid of sorrow. Most people treat sadness like it's contagious. He struggled to formulate a response to such unexpected insight. She retains her beauty, Mila added, almost casually as if mentioning the time. Even though her internal luminescence has dimmed, ceruleans glow brighter when they're happy. Did you know that? She used to light rooms. Arden glanced toward the woman, Nailari. Her hands cradled the nutrient container gently, fingers trembling, almost imperceptibly. Her posture remained careful, protective, as if she feared spilling even silence itself. He turned back to the child, increasingly aware of her unusual perceptiveness. "You're remarkably observant for someone so young." "Necessity demands it," she replied with unexpected gravity. "No one listens unless I initiate communication, and even then attention spans here are shorter than profit margins. I've learned to say important things quickly." Her voice remained steady, but the implication struck him forcefully. He didn't answer immediately, considering his response. Instead, he extracted a cloth napkin from his jacket, a small luxury in the station economy, folded it with deliberate care, and handed it to her without comment. Mila accepted it with a slightly surprised blink, as if receiving an unexpected gift. "I possess nothing to offer in exchange," she said, examining the simple cloth as if it were precious. "Exchange isn't required for kindness," he said, surprising himself with the sentiment. She considered this concept as if it were a complex equation, then reached into the folds of her tunic and extracted a slender piece of copper wire twisted into a spiral pattern. "For your beverage container. It imparts a familiar aroma when immersed, slightly metallic with hints of home minerals. If you experience nostalgia for places you've never been." He accepted the humble offering with appropriate solemnity. No one spoke for several minutes, silence comfortable rather than strained. The station illumination flickered once, then dimmed, transitioning to evening cycle with all the subtlety of a light switch. Arden stood, knees protesting slightly. "Will you return tomorrow?" Mila asked, the question casual but the answer clearly significant. "Probably," a commitment disguised as probability. "You rarely employ deception, do you?" Her eyes narrowed slightly, assessing. "No," he admitted. "I've experienced sufficient deception for multiple lifetimes. The truth is simpler to maintain." She nodded as if this made perfect sense, as if honesty were a practical choice rather than a moral one. As he turned to leave, her voice followed him, quiet but distinct, like a secret shared willingly. "She favors spiced fruit compote, the kind with the little red berries that pop between your teeth. I doubt she remembers this preference, but I do. She used to close her eyes when she ate it." Arden didn't respond verbally, but as he walked away, the small copper coil warmed in his pocket like a promise. Arden didn't return the following day, a decision he immediately regretted but stubbornly maintained. He rationalized his absence with professional obligations that sounded impressive even in his own head. Consecutive translation contracts for diplomatic communications, calibration malfunction in his language implant that required recoding, shipping documentation lost in transmission, requiring extensive reconstruction. But the truth hummed more persistently than excuses, a frequency he couldn't ignore. He had awakened with an unfamiliar constriction in his chest. Not anxiety, not sorrow, just something uncertain, like a door had cracked open within, and he remained undecided whether to cross the threshold or seal it permanently with industrial-grade emotional sealant. He avoided Commerce Sector 5 entirely, taking circuitous routes to his quarters that added 30 minutes to his commute, but successfully avoided the possibility of accidental encounters, sleeping with environmental controls and maximum illumination, because darkness invited thought and thought invited uncertainty. On the second day, guilt and curiosity formed an alliance strong enough to overcome his resistance. He returned quietly early when the station was still yawning itself awake. The corridor hummed with morning activity, migrant laborers gathering in small clusters, exchanging information about which overseers were least unpleasant, repair crews disputing resource allocation for equipment that had been filing retirement paperwork for decades, scavenger children pursuing one another between vendor stalls, with the resilient joy of those who haven't yet learned that fun isn't a scheduled station activity. The atmosphere buzzed with life and purpose, but not for them. Nilari and Mila remained in place, same blanket, same crate, same protective armor, but something had changed. There were no containers waiting for him this time, no folded messages containing beautiful script, only stillness, the kind that has settled in for a long stay. He hesitated, then as before he placed a beverage container in a small carton, this time containing white root compote with actual spiced fruit segments, the real thing, not synthetic. He'd paid premium rates, negotiated with a vendor who treated amusement as part of the transaction. Expensive preferences for someone you claim not to know, the vendor had commented while transferring a portion into the container, his three eyes blinking in sequence to indicate skepticism. She must have other appealing qualities beyond her dietary discrimination. Arden had offered no explanation, just additional credits. Now, as he carefully positioned the items beside the crate with the precision of someone disarming an explosive, Mila looked up, not smiling, not beaming as before, just observing, assessing with eyes too old for her face. "Your absence was noted," she stated, the words factual rather than accusatory. He nodded in acknowledgement, acceptance of both the observation and the implied disappointment. "She refrained from consuming yesterday. She speculated she might have frightened you away." The statement landed like a small stone dropped into still water. He blinked in surprise, the concept foreign to his understanding of their dynamic. She didn't. People withdraw when she begins exhibiting needs. Needs are inconvenient. The child delivered this wisdom with the wariness of someone who had cataloged a lifetime of abandonments. Arden seated himself without comment, not as distant this time, perhaps a meter away, close enough to detect her breathing, far enough to allow retreat if needed. "You brought compote," Mila observed, her eyes shifting to the container with the practiced nonchalance of someone trying not to appear too interested. "She won't articulate it, but she experienced your absence. Absence leaves different marks than presence." He remained silent, simply unsealed the lid, allowing aromatic steam to drift toward them like an invitation. Nilari didn't reach for it, though her fingers twitched almost imperceptibly. She believes accepting excessive assistance will create expectations of vocalization, that everything has a price tag, especially kindness. "I don't expect anything," he said, surprising himself with the truth of it. Mila's expression softened, the wariness melting slightly. That's what unsettles her most. Unexplained kindness is the most suspicious kind. Silence descended, not empty but dense with unspoken sentiment, grief, caution, the gradual weaving of invisible connections between strangers who were becoming less strange to each other by the moment. Arden leaned back, arms braced behind him, adopting a posture of casual patience. "When I was 12, my foster sibling ceased verbal communication," he said, the words emerging without planning. "We experienced excessive relocation, 6 different placements within a single standard year. Administrator called it optimizing placement outcomes. We called it perpetual packing." He stopped speaking somewhere between the third and fourth transition, just closed his mouth one day and threw away the key. Mila's eyebrows lifted slightly, but she remained silent, listening with her entire body. "One night we discovered a canine during a meteorological disturbance, just a malnourished, partially blind creature with 3 legs and an optimistic disposition completely unjustified by its circumstances. We concealed it within the ventilation system for 21 days. My brother began whispering to it, first words I'd heard from him in months. He named it Hopeless, which I thought was pessimistic until he explained it was actually hopeless, because hope is unnecessary when you already have something good." He paused, monitoring her reaction. She wasn't smiling, but she was attentive, completely present in a way few adults managed. "I didn't report the animal, not even when our living space developed an odor that suggested something had died and was reconsidering its career options. It represented the first time I'd observed him smile since the second relocation." Nilari shifted almost imperceptibly. Her fingers curled more tightly around her shawl, a movement so subtle it would be invisible to anyone not watching for it. Arden's voice lowered, matching the intimacy of the moment. Eventually someone discovered it. They removed it with the compassion typically reserved for removing trash. My brother didn't communicate verbally again for a standard year. I learned that silence isn't empty, it's full of everything that can't be trusted to words. Mila regarded him thoughtfully, something unreadable in her expression, an assessment being recalculated. "So you don't compel vocalization, you don't demand performance for payment. No, you simply wait. Silence isn't a problem to solve, it's a language to learn." I attempt that approach. Patience is easier in theory than execution. She nodded slowly, then reached over and gently pushed the Compot container closer to her mother. For a moment, Nylari remained motionless, a statue contemplating animation, then cautiously extended her hand, fingers brushing the container's edge like testing water temperature. She paused, then lifted it, still without meeting his gaze. She unwrapped the utensil, consumed one small portion, then another. Arden exhaled softly, saying nothing. Victory unnamed but acknowledged. She used to create melodies during night cycles, Mila whispered, her voice taking on the quality of confession. Before transport vessels ceased arriving, before our documentation was invalidated, and we became administratively invisible. She sang to me constantly. Cerulean songs aren't merely auditory patterns. They convey identity, history, belonging, their genetic memory given voice. She ceased singing after authorities declared it disruptive. Apparently, her voice reminded people of what they'd lost, and remembering loss is considered a public disturbance. Bitterness flavored the words despite her attempt at neutrality. He observed Nylari. Her posture remained guarded, but her hand no longer trembled as she ate. Small victory. She sings during unconsciousness sometimes, Mila added, voice softer now, sharing a precious secret. But only when her dreams transport her backward, to before. Before, the question emerged with genuine curiosity. Before she ceased being someone. Before she became invisible. Arden felt his throat constrict, unexpected emotion rising like tide. He wasn't certain what prompted his next action. Perhaps the quiet resignation in Nylari's shoulders, or the precision of her movements as she finished eating, the careful way she savored each bite. But he leaned forward and extracted from his coat pocket a folded slip of documentation. It was outdated, one of the early draft forms from his interpreter certification, printed with emergency translation protocols. He had inscribed something on the reverse during the previous night. Not poetry, nothing beautiful, just words that had formed themselves while he wasn't looking. She needn't sing. She already communicates volumes in silence. He placed it at the crate's edge, then stood, mission accomplished without fanfare. She comprehends standard script, Mila said, watching him with renewed interest. And Cerulean. She was a linguistic instructor before we became refugees. I suspected as much from her writing. A professor reduced to silence. The irony wasn't lost on him. She'll examine it after I transition to sleep. She reads everything once she thinks no one is watching. Good. Words are meant to be read, even the imperfect ones. He turned to leave, but just before departing, Mila called after him, her voice carrying unexpected warmth. Arden? He looked back expectantly, paused mid-step. If she sings during unconsciousness tonight, I'll mention your designation. I'll tell her you listen for what isn't said. His mouth curved upward slightly, a genuine smile finding its way through his usual defenses. Tell her I'm listening, for words, for silence, for everything in between. Helixar's night cycle brought a hush that never achieved true silence. The illumination dimmed to levels that suggested darkness without delivering it, but ventilation systems continued their persistent hissing commentary on station maintenance. Somewhere overhead, cooling fluid moved through an oxidizing conduit with rhythmic clicks, like a clock counting down to something no one had bothered to identify. In the residential quarters, doors sealed with pneumatic whispers promising security, but in Commerce Sector 5, silence merely signified fewer witnesses to life's ongoing struggles. Arden traversed the outer perimeter of the sector carrying thermal fabric wrapped around a food parcel, moving with purpose disguised as casual wandering. His shoulder ached from an earlier incident. Someone had struck him with an elbow during a vendor altercation over unpaid credits, the station's version of cultural exchange. But the discomfort barely registered in his awareness. Routine physical distress had faded from his consciousness the moment he began walking toward her again. Nylari. He still hadn't heard her speak, not once, but he recognized her now, by her stillness, by how she folded her hands to conceal their trembling, by the way she always created space for Mila to press close before allowing herself to exhale. Tonight when he arrived, she wasn't positioned in her customary location. Neither was Mila. Panic surged briefly in his throat, a physical sensation of loss before he spotted them sheltered in the shadow of a nearby power distribution node. A crude curtain of joined metallic sheets draped across their blanket, offering the illusion of privacy in a station where privacy was a theoretical concept. They weren't hiding, merely withdrawing from constant observation, creating a boundary in a boundaryless existence. He didn't announce himself, just crouched low and waited with the patience he'd advocated. After several seconds, Mila peered out, blinking in recognition, a small face emerging from improvised shelter. "Your arrival is delayed," she observed, temporal awareness apparently sharper than most adults. "Had to wait for the spiced fruit vendor's temper to cool." He took exception to my suggestion that his pricing structure resembled extortion with less paperwork. She studied him with that penetrating gaze, then stepped aside and gestured him closer, a beckoning that carried the weight of invitation. "She's experiencing fatigue today, the kind sleep doesn't fix." "Is she unwell?" Concern edged his voice. "No," Mila whispered, "just remembering. Memory is exhausting when it's mostly loss." Arden placed the food parcel beside her, an offering that asked nothing. "What's significant about today's date?" 14th. Cerulean winter would commence today if we remained on our homeworld. It's a time of gathering, of preparation, of stories told around thermal sources, of community. Home. Arden leaned against the crate, the word heavy with implications. "You retain memories of it?" "Only the melodies, the aromas." She says winter should smell of boiled root bark and crimson ember ash from the sacred trees. She described it so often I sometimes believe I remember it myself, though I was too young when we left. He smiled faintly. "Sounds considerably more pleasant than engine lubricant and scorched protein." "Station ambiance lacks a certain poetry." Mila shrugged with the pragmatism of youth. "I prefer this environment, despite its olfactory limitations. At minimum, it contains you. That's an improvement over yesterday." She meant it sincerely. That made it more affecting, stripped of manipulation or guile. From behind the metallic curtain, Nylari shifted position with a quiet exhalation that might have been a sigh in someone with less control. Arden glanced over, caught a glimpse of her eyes through a gap in the covering, glowing faintly azure in the dimness, bioluminescence responding to emotion. She didn't withdraw this time, didn't flinch from his gaze. "I brought something," he said, extracting a small scarf from his coat pocket. Inexpensive material, but soft, lined with insulating mesh. Deep blue with a slender, silver border that caught light and returned it enhanced. He extended it without pressure, an offer without obligation. Mila reached for it first, a child's curiosity overcoming protocol. She possessed something similar previously, before the transport accident. She kept it in a preservation case. Nylari remained motionless, a statue contemplating animation. But gradually, with extreme care, she extended her hand. Her fingers brushed against his as she accepted the offering. The contact was momentary, incidental, but it coursed through him like borrowed memory, a current of connection. She held the scarf close to her face, eyes closing in what might have been pain or might have been remembrance. A tremor passed through her shoulders, then a breath, then stillness again, emotion contained but acknowledged. "She had a mate," Mila said, observing her mother without blinking, a statement of fact rather than accusation or pity. Arden remained silent, waiting for what came next, respecting the gravity of shared history. He perished during transit when the environmental pod experienced overload. They decompressed the chambers in incorrect sequence to save life support resources. He occupied the outer section. She was inside with me. That's how we survived. She never explained this to me. It's not in my official memory. "How did you learn of it?" Arden asked quietly. "She doesn't verbalize it. She carries it in her facial structure, in the specific tension in her jaw when certain announcements play over station communications. It explains her refusal to sing. That was their connection, their method of communication beyond words. She believes creating music now would be like addressing someone permanently absent, shouting into empty space." Arden's throat constricted painfully, empathy a physical sensation. "And you? Do you miss him?" "I miss who she was when he existed. I miss the person who knew how to make joy without effort. I miss someone I can't actually remember except through her loss." That response carried too much wisdom for a child, insight beyond her chronological development. He reached out instinctively and gently placed his hand over hers, connection offered without demand. Mila didn't withdraw, accepted the gesture with the solemnity it deserved. She dreams of him occasionally. She whispers his designation during unconsciousness. It's barely audible, as if she fears he might respond, and she couldn't bear either the answer or the silence. They sat in shared quietude for an extended period, the station's ambient sounds providing background texture to more important silence. Nilari remained without speech but didn't turn away, present in her stillness. When Mila drifted into sleep, curled beside her mother beneath the new scarf, body finally surrendering to the vulnerability of childhood, Arden moved closer. He didn't touch Nilari, he wouldn't presume such liberty, but he spoke, voice low and measured, offering words to someone who collected silence. I once believed silence represented safety, that if I maintained isolation, avoided questions, withheld offerings, I couldn't disappoint anyone again. That detachment was armor against future wounds. Her head tilted slightly, listening without acknowledgement, receiving without promising return. But I no longer consider that accurate. Silence is merely another manifestation of injury. It festers when not allowed to breathe. Wounds need air to heal. He extracted something from his pocket, a small device that had cost more than he'd admit, activated the holographic interface, fingers navigating the display with practiced efficiency. I downloaded archived material, he murmured. Cerulean winter ceremonies. Instrumental only. No voices to compare, no songs to remember being sung differently, just the cultural foundations that support the melodies. He positioned the device near her, close enough to activate but not so close as to demand. You needn't listen, but if you choose to, perhaps it won't cause as much distress. Sometimes approaching loss sideways hurts less than confronting it directly. He stood to depart, mission accomplished, without requiring acknowledgement. And just as he turned, he heard it. Not a word, not a sentence, just a sound. Soft, barely perceptible, a single syllable exhaled into darkness, drawn not from vocal apparatus but from memory preserved against extinction. Terrace, her mate's designation. Arden froze in place, caught between motion and stillness. He didn't look back, just allowed the name to settle into the space between them. Not burdensome, not piercing, just authentic. And for the first time he departed knowing she had shared something with him. Her first word, her first wound, her truth. A gift more valuable than any he could offer in return. The station never truly achieved complete dormancy, but during this period it pretended with the conviction of a mediocre actor. Arden navigated the dimly illuminated corridors of Commerce Sector 5 with deliberate, unhurried steps. His footfalls echoed softly against the metal floor panels, barely distinguishable beneath the low murmur of the ventilation system. The station's pulse, fans humming, distant mechanical sounds maintained its rhythm, familiar, indifferent, perpetual. But something had transformed within this unchanging environment. Nilari had spoken, just one word, whispered into darkness. A name. Terrace. It resonated in his consciousness like a vibrating string, delicate, honest, originating from her lips, her voice. That night Arden didn't sleep, not from restlessness or his concern, but from something far more subtle, quiet reverence for what had been shared. He sat in his quarters with illumination reduced to minimum, watching the tiny holographic archive flicker with images of frozen cerulean landscapes and transcribed ceremonial compositions. The audio remained deactivated. Silence held greater significance now than any reproduction could match. By morning, he found himself moving without internal debate. Beverage, nourishment, a clean blanket rolled beneath one arm like a battle standard. He didn't verify the time, didn't rehearse potential conversation. He simply proceeded with the certainty of someone following an established path. They weren't in their usual location. The predictable no longer applied. His breath caught momentarily until he detected a shimmer of silver behind a loose utility access panel, a partially concealed alcove that maintenance had either forgotten or deliberately ignored. Mila's wire-bound hair protruded from the shadows like an improvised signal flag. He crouched beside the panel, allowing silence to settle before speaking, respecting the rhythm they had established. Have I arrived late? The question contained no anxiety, merely verification. No, Mila replied, emerging halfway from their shelter. We simply preferred temporary invisibility. Visibility has consequences, and sometimes we need to exist without being observed. He passed her the beverage and observed her hands encircle it, still small, still steady, accepting what was offered without question. Are you concealing yourselves from someone specific? The question was casual but carried protective undertones. Not precisely. We just required a period without observation. Being seen constantly is its own kind of exhaustion. Even performances need intermissions. Arden nodded and waited, patience a language they shared fluently. Several seconds later, Nilari stepped out from behind her daughter. She didn't avoid his gaze this time, didn't erect the shield of downcast eyes. Her expression wasn't completely open, but it was no longer fully guarded. She regarded him like someone relearning how to interpret familiar symbols, gradually reconstructing meaning from shapes that had lost their significance. I heard the ceremonial compositions, she said. Her voice was soft, roughened from disuse like an instrument long stored, but distinctly hers, lower than he had imagined, with harmonic undertones that suggested singing had once been natural. Arden nodded once, acknowledging without emphasizing the milestone. They're stored locally now, accessible if you desire them again. No obligation, just availability. I dreamed of creating music. Her words emerged carefully, tested before released. I didn't awaken weeping. That's unusual. She offered this like a confession, not seeking sympathy, simply stating a quiet truth, a data point in recovery. Mela sipped her beverage, watching their exchange with scientific interest. She hummed during unconsciousness. It lacked perfect pitch, but I found it pleasing. It sounded like remembering. Nilari glanced at her daughter, the corner of her mouth lifting slightly, not quite a smile, but its potential, the geological pressure that precedes diamonds. Arden observed them both momentarily, then reached into the small satchel at his side with casual purpose. I brought something. He extracted a tightly folded square of fabric and unfolded it with a flourish that suggested ceremony without mockery. A garment, simple, dark, clean, cerulean design evident in the asymmetrical closure and embedded symbolic patterns. Not station-issued standard wear that screamed refugee to anyone with eyes. He'd negotiated with a textile merchant 2 sectors away, trading translation services in dignity-preserving silence about the merchant's creative inventory sourcing. Nilari's eyes narrowed slightly, not suspicious, just cautious, uncertainty hovering like a question unasked. Acceptance isn't obligatory, he said, holding it carefully toward her. But I considered perhaps if you possessed something that felt authentically yours, something that connected to before without demanding you be who you were then. She didn't immediately accept it. Instead, she traced her fingers along the seam, following the pattern with the reverence usually reserved for religious texts. The fabric caught on a callus near her thumb, a small imperfection meeting another. I haven't worn anything resembling this since before, she began, words failing where meaning overflowed. That's precisely why I acquired it, he completed for her, understanding without requiring explanation. Not to replace what was lost, but to acknowledge it existed. She met his gaze directly this time, didn't look away. A moment extended between them, longer than previous ones, then she accepted the garment, refolded it with ritual care, held it in her lap as if it were something sacred, both symbol and substance. Mila tilted her head curiously, observing their exchange. You're expending considerable effort, Arden. Most people don't notice us at all unless we're inconveniencing them by existing too visibly. He laughed softly, surprised by the observation. Am I that transparent? You don't blink when observing her now. You've stopped maintaining safety distance. Your body speaks fluent interest. Is that positive? It's courageous. Most people prefer comfortable blindness to uncomfortable seeing. The child leaned against her mother, who now sat beside Arden on the metal floor, their legs nearly touching. Not quite, but close enough that he could sense the warmth of her presence. The space between them no longer felt distant, no longer a protective moat, but a narrowing stream. I previously believed I couldn't experience this sensation again, Nilari said suddenly, words emerging as if surprised by their own existence. Her voice wavered, but she maintained control, a pilot navigating turbulence. Not after Terrace, not after losing my former self, not after forgetting how to be someone rather than something. You haven't lost her, Arden replied with quiet certainty. She's present. You simply needed to become someone different temporarily. Survival requires adaptation, not elimination. Her hands tensed slightly over the fabric in her lap, knuckles expressing what words couldn't yet form. And what do you perceive when you observe me now? What do you see that others don't? He didn't respond immediately, considering the weight his answer would carry. When he did, his voice was quiet, certain, each word placed with deliberate care. I see someone who endured beyond reasonable expectation, someone who still understands how to preserve joy even when it causes pain, someone who protected what mattered when everything else was negotiable, someone worth knowing in any version she chooses to be. She offered no verbal response, but she leaned marginally closer to him, and he remained still, accepting the trust this small movement represented. Mila was watching, quiet, intrigued, a scientist observing an experiment yielding unexpected results. You're going to kiss her, she stated, not as a question, simply a prediction delivered with clinical accuracy. Arden smiled faintly, embarrassment meeting amusement. I don't initiate anything without explicit consent. That's the first rule of respectful existence. She desires it, Mila replied with the casual confidence of someone stating obvious astronomical facts, then stood with exaggerated casualness. But perhaps not while I observe. Some data I don't need to collect personally. With that declaration, she wandered toward the distant end of the corridor with her beverage, trailing a hummed melody that resembled one of the ceremonial compositions, but with improvised variations that made it uniquely hers. Arden looked at Nylari. She was watching him, not afraid, not guarded, simply waiting with the patience of someone who had learned that rushing produced nothing but regret. So he moved closer, raising a hand that contained both question and possibility. He didn't touch her initially, but she reached up and placed her fingers against his palm, guiding it gently to her cheek in a gesture of permission granted. Her skin was warm, smooth, authentic beneath his touch. When their lips met, the contact wasn't rushed or urgent. It was careful, earned, an exchange between two individuals who had existed too long without such connection, who recognized the rarity of what was being offered. When it concluded, Nylari didn't look away, and Arden didn't release her. They remained connected, newness gradually becoming familiar. I don't know what follows, she whispered, uncertainty without fear. Neither do I, he replied with equal honesty, but I'd welcome discovering it together. The unknown is less frightening with company. She nodded once, slowly, and for the first time in an extended period, they existed together not as strangers but as something gradually becoming complete, two fragments finding unexpected fit. The environmental regulator in their new living quarters clicked softly as it adjusted for the artificial chill of Helixar's simulated night, a mechanical attempt at planetary rhythms. A steady vibration hummed through the walls, aged circuitry perhaps, or a recycled atmosphere, completing its circulation cycle and starting anew. The sound once triggered Nylari's anxiety, association with ship systems failing. Now it constituted part of the rhythm of security, the background music of stability. Mila had drifted into unconsciousness on the sleeping platform, mouth partially open in childhood abandon, one arm extended across the thermal covering in a gesture of complete surrender to sleep. Arden sat on the floor beside her, back against the wall, one leg stretched outward in comfortable claim of space. His outer garment remained draped over his shoulder from an extended work assignment that had run longer than anticipated. He hadn't even removed his footwear, exhaustion and hunger competing for dominance. Nylari handed him a container of warm beverage. Not spiced, not sweetened, just heated to perfection. Warmth made tangible. She seated herself beside him in comfortable silence that required no filling. He accepted the container with both hands, the gesture one of reverence for what it represented rather than what it contained. You needn't have remained awake, she said quietly, observation rather than criticism. She regarded him steadily, eyes luminescent in the dim light. You needn't have returned. I always will. The declaration emerged effortlessly now, not performative, not desperate, simply authentic. A truth so obvious it barely needed stating. She gazed into her container as if reading fortunes and steam patterns. I'm still learning to accept that possibility. Trust is a vocabulary I'm relearning. I understand, he said gently, meaning it completely. Take whatever time you require. I'm not departing. She didn't verbally respond, but the way she leaned against his shoulder communicated more effectively than language, a physical dialect of trust. They remained in that position for an extended period, him consuming his beverage quietly, her resting against him in the gentle quietude of their space. The station's ambient sounds continued uninterrupted, but they didn't intrude on what mattered. Only when Mila stirred, dream-caught and mumbling, did Nilari speak again. Security personnel still observe us. They've increased surveillance frequency. They monitor everyone. It's their primary entertainment in a job consisting mainly of watching nothing happen. Not like this, not with this specific attention. He set his container down, concern replacing comfort. Did something occur I should know about? No, she said hesitantly. But I can sense the scrutiny, particularly when we traverse the marketplace. They regard me as if I've appropriated something that isn't mine, as if happiness is a resource I'm stealing rather than creating. You haven't taken anything not freely given, he said firmly, certainty replacing caution. No, she agreed, her voice barely audible. But I've survived, and sometimes that feels criminal to certain observers. Success is suspicious when failure was the expected outcome. Arden reached for her hand, interlacing his fingers with hers in deliberate connection. Her grip was steady now, not hesitant, accepting what was offered and returning equal measure. I want to sponsor your permanent residency, he said, the words emerging fully formed, a decision made somewhere beyond conscious thought. She became completely still, a prey animal sensing change in environment. I want this arrangement formalized, he added, committing to the course. Not merely proximity, not simply kindness. I want to construct a shared existence, however modest, however challenging. I want mornings and difficulties and solutions found together. You jeopardize your status for that possibility? She asked, the question serious but not discouraging. I already have, he said simply. The moment I decided you mattered more than routine. The moment Mela tugged my jacket and asked if I was unattached. She turned toward him fully then, her eyes shimmering with a subtle bioluminescence that always seemed to intensify when she experienced profound emotion. Internal light responding to internal change. And what do you anticipate in exchange? The question carried no suspicion, only clarification of terms. Nothing, as he said, but I'll gratefully receive anything you choose to share. That's what partnership means, mutual giving without accountants keeping score. Nilari didn't answer immediately. She looked down at Mila sleeping between them, vulnerability incarnate, then surveyed their modest living space with its makeshift improvements, then returned her attention to him with renewed focus. I haven't spoken his designation aloud in years, she murmured, confession without shame, not with meaning behind it. Terrace, he said quietly, offering the name back to her without claiming it. She blinked in surprise, momentary confusion. You heard? You whispered once when you believed I was unconscious, that night with the ceremonial music. A momentary silence passed between them, not awkward, but weighted with significance. Her lips parted, then closed, then opened again, finding words. I didn't believe I would ever be permitted to continue forward. That grief was a permanent address. He cupped her cheek tenderly, physical connection reinforcing emotional understanding. You needn't move beyond. You simply need to keep moving. The past walks with us. It doesn't anchor us. Tears gathered, unshed but visible. She didn't flinch when he leaned closer, didn't look away when he kissed her forehead with gentle reverence. They completed the sponsorship application the following morning, bureaucracy making official what had already been decided in more important ways. The administrative officer in the registry department displayed predictable disinterest in the lives being reconstructed before him. Are you certain? He asked without looking up from his console, the question procedural rather than compassionate. Mixed-species households receive limited protection under extended station regulations. Section 47B is quite explicit about non-interference, but equally explicit about non-assistance. Arden signed without hesitation, the gesture decisive. We'll establish our own protections. Community creates better security than regulations. Nilari signed as well, her handwriting elegant even in standard script. Her hand trembled once but didn't falter, commitment overcoming ingrained caution. Mila added her own uneven inscription in the lower corner, the letters determined if imperfect. No one requested it, no one prevented it. The child claiming her place in the narrative. The process received official verification within the hour. Bureaucracy occasionally efficient when keeping detailed records of people it preferred to ignore. They relocated to a slightly larger accommodation on a quieter level. Still modest, still basic, but with a door that's secured with their own access code and a viewport that faced the station's interior garden enclosure. Synthetic vegetation and slow-growing moss beneath ultraviolet panels designed to mimic planetary conditions none of them had seen in years. It resembled nothing like their original home, but suggested something they could nurture together, potential rather than history. That evening, Nilari stood in the entrance of their new living space, cradling a beverage container and surveying their domain with quiet wonder. Arden arranged their few possessions with care, soft scarf properly folded in a place of honor, Mila's information tablet stacked neatly beside educational modules, the broken copper wire she habitually twisted into decorative elements suspended near the ventilation outlet where it caught light and scattered it in unpredictable patterns. "You accomplished all this," she said softly, the words carrying more weight than their simple structure suggested, with no certainty regarding future developments. He regarded her thoughtfully, seeing beyond current reality to something more significant. "I know precisely what it resembles." She raised an eyebrow questioningly, invitation to elaborate. He smiled, certainty without arrogance. "It looks exactly like this, one moment at a time. You, Mila, an environmental regulator that functions at half capacity but makes interesting percussion when it cycles. But it belongs to us. We belong to each other by choice rather than circumstance." She approached and took his hand, their fingers intertwining with practiced ease. "This transcends mere survival," she whispered, wonder coloring the words. "This is choosing rather than enduring." "Yes," he agreed. "It's connection." And for once, that concept didn't feel oppressive or painful or hazardous. It simply felt authentic, a truth recognized rather than manufactured. They sat together as the illumination dimmed for sleep cycle, the station's rhythm becoming their own. Mila's soft respiration filled the space, childhood resilience claiming rest as a right rather than luxury. The environmental regulator clicked rhythmically, keeping promises. Outside the viewport, the artificial garden glowed like distant stellar illumination, beauty created rather than discovered. The universe remained unchanged, but they had transformed, and that sufficed. More than sufficed. It excelled. The days that followed established new patterns, routines created rather than imposed. Arden's translation work brought steady income, supplemented by Nilari's gradual return to linguistic consultation, first with small cultural projects, then with station documentation that required Cyrillian nuance. Mila attended the education center 3/4 away, initially skeptical, but gradually enthusiastic as she discovered other children with similarly complex histories. Their small quarters became home through accumulated details, a shelf of actual books Arden had collected over years, a wall-hanging Nilari created from memory of Cyrillian seasonal celebrations, Mila's increasingly sophisticated wire sculptures capturing imagination in metal. Their first major conflict erupted over something absurdly trivial, the proper temperature for evening beverages, and ended in laughter when they realized they were arguing about preferences rather than survival. The freedom to disagree without fear marked a milestone neither acknowledged aloud but both recognized. When station security questioned their arrangement during a routine sector inspection, Arden produced documentation with calm efficiency, while Nilari stood with quiet dignity, no longer hiding her existence. The official marked their status with visible reluctance, but undeniable authorization. On the anniversary of their first meeting, a date Mila had recorded with scientific precision, they shared spiced fruit compote from an actual ceramic container, rather than station-issue synthetics. Mila presented them with a complex wire sculpture depicting three figures standing together, art transforming memory into tangible form. That night, after Mila slept, they spoke quietly of possibilities. Another child, perhaps, a sibling as requested. The conversation held neither pressure nor reluctance, just shared exploration of expanding joy. When Nilari sang for the first time, truly sang, not just hummed, it was a simple lullaby as Mila fought a childhood fever. The melody filled their quarters with something ancient and new simultaneously. Grief honored but no longer defining. Arden listened from the doorway, witnessing resurrection without intruding upon it. Later, she explained that singing felt like reclaiming rather than remembering, creation rather than commemoration. He understood without requiring elaboration. As months passed, their existence expanded beyond mere stability into genuine thriving. Nilari taught small classes in Cerulean cultural practices to interested station residents, preservation through sharing. Arden's translation practice grew to include diplomatic contracts with visiting delegations, bringing both income and status that provided additional protection. Mila developed friendship with a Terran child whose fascination with Cerulean culture matched her curiosity about Earth traditions, cultural exchange at its most fundamental level. They were not without challenges. Resource shortages affected all station residents. Bureaucratic regulations shifted unpredictably, and occasional hostility from those who viewed mixed households with suspicion required vigilance. But these obstacles were faced together, problems shared rather than burdens carried alone. When Mila asked difficult questions about her father, Nilari answered with honesty tempered by compassion, sharing memories without drowning in them. Arden offered perspective without replacing what was lost, additional rather than substitute. When the official notification arrived confirming Nilari and Mila's permanent resident status, no longer refugees but citizens with rights and responsibilities, they celebrated with a small gathering of friends who had entered their expanding circle. The security officer who had initially questioned their arrangement brought a small plant for their viewport ledge, an olive branch disguised as horticulture. That night, after celebrations concluded and Mila slept surrounded by gifts and security, Nilari and Arden stood by the viewport watching the garden's night cycle illumination create patterns across the synthetic landscape. "Did you imagine this outcome?" she asked softly, when a small child asked if you were unattached. He smiled, memory vivid despite the passage of time. "I couldn't imagine anything. I was too busy trying not to look terrified by a tiny matchmaker with unstoppable determination." She laughed, the sound still rare enough to feel precious. "She's always been tactically brilliant, identifies weakness and exploits without mercy. My weakness being a complete inability to resist direct questions from fearless children. Your weakness being a heart you pretended not to have." She touched his face gently. "Thank you for letting us find it." He covered her hand with his own. "Thank you for giving me a reason to use it." Outside their window, the artificial garden continued its programmed cycles, unaware it was bearing witness to something far more rare than synthetic flora. Genuine growth, chosen family, love cultivated in the least promising soil. They stood together, watching beauty they had helped create, while behind them Mila dreamed of siblings and adventures, and a future expanded rather than constrained. Helixar Hub never experienced true sunrise, not genuinely, but each morning the garden illumination along the interior ring intensified by 4 degrees, just enough for the moss to extend and the atmosphere to vibrate faintly with the promise of existence. In their living space, Nilari observed the first glow penetrate the translucent panel above their sleeping platform. The soft green luminescence cast patterns on the ceiling, slow and animated. Beside her, Arden stirred, blinking into consciousness, his arm already reaching to locate her hand. She was present every morning now. She remained. Mila's quiet snoring filtered from the adjacent sleeping area, her growing frame now requiring more space than when they'd first arrived. One of her hands had fallen beyond the thermal covering, fingers still curled around the bent wire ornament she had fashioned the previous evening. Her latest creation, a representation of the stars as seen from cerulean skies, memory translated into art. Nilari smiled and permitted herself to remain motionless just momentarily longer, cataloging gratitude before action. They had occupied this home for nearly a standard year, not extensive by planetary measure, yet transformative in every meaningful way. Her body had fully accepted it now, no longer braced for evacuation or loss. Her respiration remained steady when unfamiliar sounds occurred. Her shoulders maintained relaxed posture, even in public areas. The survival instinct that had previously governed every moment now served rather than dominated, a tool rather than a master. She rose from the sleeping platform, kissed Arden's cheek as he blinked into consciousness, and moved barefoot to the small food preparation area to heat water for morning beverages. The atmosphere carried pleasant notes of home, beverage concentrate, warm metal, the subtle fragrance of the living plant gifted by the security officer, now flourishing against all station-based probability. As she prepared their breakfast, actual bread she now baked weekly, fresh rather than preserved fruit acquired through Arden's expanding network of contacts, she hummed quietly, melody flowing without conscious decision. In the doorway, Arden paused to listen, appreciation evident in his expression. He moved behind her, arms encircling her waist in comfortable familiarity. "New song?" he asked, curious rather than cautious. She leaned back against him, acceptance without hesitation. "Very old song, actually, a cerulean welcome for spring. I remembered it this morning completely intact, like finding something valuable I thought I'd lost permanently." "It's beautiful," he said simply. "Yes," she agreed, turning to face him, "but so is this, what we've built, what continues building itself through us." From the sleeping area came Mila's voice, sleep roughened but determined. "If you're being romantic again, at least wait until after breakfast. Some of us require nutrition before emotional complexity." They laughed together, sound filling their home with the most basic magic, joy recognized and multiplied through sharing. Nilari called back, "Food preparation accelerates when assistance appears." Dramatic groaning preceded Mila's appearance, hair in magnificent disarray, eyes still half closed in protest against consciousness. "I maintain that mornings are a flawed concept requiring significant redesign." "Duly noted," Arden replied with mock seriousness. "I'll submit your formal complaint to Station Chronology Management." Mila stuck out her tongue, childhood still claiming territory in her increasingly adolescent demeanor, then set about arranging utensils with surprising efficiency for someone claiming incapacitation. They moved around each other in the small space with practiced choreography, a dance of belonging. Later, over their shared meal, conversation flowed without effort or caution, plans discussed, day's activities coordinated. When Mila departed for her education session, bag slung casually over one shoulder, she paused at the door with uncharacteristic solemnity. "I'm glad you didn't say no," she said to Arden, reference requiring no elaboration. "Smartest non-decision I ever made," he replied with equal seriousness. She nodded once, then resumed typical adolescent energy, door closing behind her with unnecessary enthusiasm. Nilari and Arden remained at the table, comfortable silence settling between them. "She'll never let you forget she orchestrated this entire arrangement," Nilari observed with amusement. "I wouldn't want her to," he replied honestly. Debts are worth acknowledging permanently." She reached across the table, took his hand in hers. "I sang to Tyrus in my dreams last night. Not with sadness, just farewell. Properly this time." He squeezed her hand gently, understanding the significance. "What did he say?" "That happiness suits me, that he's glad I found it again." She smiled, peace rather than pain in the expression. "Dreams are strange that way, giving us what we need to hear. Or perhaps just letting us hear what we already know," he suggested. "Perhaps." She stood, not releasing his hand. "We should prepare for work." "We should," he agreed, making no move to depart. They remained connected for a moment longer, acknowledgement of journey traveled and continuing. Then, with practiced reluctance, they separated to prepare for their respective duties. Her teaching, his translations, knowing reunion would follow with the reliability of station cycles. Outside their viewport, the artificial garden continued its programmed growth, mechanical in origin, but authentic in result. Inside, a family created against probability flourished with similar determination, life-finding expression despite unlikely circumstances. Not perfect, not without challenge, but persistently, stubbornly alive and evolving.